adesso che stiamo riprendendo i lunch seminar dopo una pausa autunnale, diciamo così, vedo che ci sono un sacco di persone che sono state contente di venire, spero non solo per il cibo, ma invece per l'interesse per quello che viene presentato. Abbiamo un ottimo speaker, un RTDB che ha preso servizio da poco, da settembre nel nostro dipartimento. La mia idea di questi seminari per un po' di tempo è proprio quella di dare spazio alle attività di ricerca delle persone che entrano a far parte del nostro dipartimento come RTB, e poi man mano andremo avanti anche con gli RTBA, ovviamente, in maniera tale da far capire e conoscere a tutti le nuove linee di ricerca che stanno entrando in dipartimento. Quindi questo è lo spirito con cui vorrei connotare, diciamo, per il prossimo, quest'anno di sicuro e probabilmente anche per il prossimo, sperando che ci siano ulteriori nuove acquisizioni ovviamente, il lunch seminar del nostro dipartimento, in modo da far conoscere a tutti i nostri nuovi portabandiera. E quindi cedo la parola a Maurizio Morisio, che qualcuno di voi avrà già incontrato perché lui sta coordinando gli interventi di tutti, per parlarvi del nostro speaker di oggi.
Grazie, spero che voi conosciate tutti Sandro Cumani, perché insomma sono anni che lavora qua. Il titolo è perfetto perché è uno dei massimi esperti di machine learning qui dentro e da sempre applicato alla speaker recognition. Ne approfitto per dirvi che i prossimi appuntamenti saranno quasi sempre il terzo mercoledì del mese, quasi sempre, a volte abbiamo dovuto spostare leggermente, però l'idea è quella. C'è un programma completo di tutti gli LTV che partecipano e quindi questo fino alla fine dell'anno. Quindi vi invito fin d'ora al prossimo evento, e però nel frattempo lascio la parola a Sandro. Non so se ci sono molti English speaking people. Who is only English speaking around? Only Daniel.
Okay, anyway, I prefer to talk in English just in case somebody doesn't speak Italian. So, my name, as was just said, is Sandro Cumani, and I've been working in the field of speaker recognition, in particular on machine learning applied to speaker recognition. So today I will go through an overview of the activities that we did in the last decade. So I will cover more or less what is the state of the art, what has been the state of the art in speaker recognition last 10 years and how we contributed to the field. So I will start giving a short introduction of what is speaker recognition and why we want to do speaker recognition, what are the applications. Then I will focus on what is the standard chain that allows us to recognize with speaking. Then I will discuss about our contributions in the field of classification and voice print extraction. I will detail what this means in a moment. And this will be the first part of this talk. Then in the second part, I will focus on some problem that is related to speaker recognition, but not just to speaker recognition, that essentially involves how we interpret the scores of a classifier. And then I will conclude with mentioning some other applications that are not strictly speaker recognition, but they are related to the field and possible extensions that go beyond voice biometrics. Now, the task of recognizing a speaker has several applications. The easiest one to imagine is the application of authentication. That is, we want to understand whether somebody is really who he claims to be, and here there are several possible use cases. For example, we can start from just unlocking a smartphone to telephone banking application where I want to give I want my bank to perform some actions, and I want to be sure that the bank is sure that I am who I claim to be, so that nobody else can, for example, steal my money. And so these applications are all those applications where it's important to be able to recognize whether who is speaking is really who he claims to be. Then there are other applications that involve surveillance, and these applications usually are in the interest of police and governments, and usually involve being able to track possible suspects and possible threats. And then there is another application in forensics where methods that are able to identify which speaking may be used to provide evidence for or against some suspect. So these systems can help forensic experts to decide whether some suspect is responsible for some speech part or not. Now, the speaker recognition is a strong root here in Turin, not just with our group, but also because there is a strong industrial presence here that works on speaker technology, and in particular the telecom lab that then became an independent company named Lopen that was then bought by Nuance Communications. Anyway, they have been working also in the field for the last 40 years, and we have been collaborating with them for a long time. So our research focuses only on industrial interests because it's driven also by the needs of the companies. Now, to understand what we do, we can start saying what we mean by speaker recognition in slightly more detail. Essentially, we have two main problems. The first, we have a speech segment. This is a speech segment, and we have a set of possible speakers, and we want to identify who is the speaker that said this sentence. So we want to label the sentence using the name of one of those people there. And then we have a slightly different problem where we are giving a speech segment. We have a claimed identity, and we want to answer to the question: is the speech segment, does the speech segment belong to the claimed identity? And this goes under the name of speaker verification. Now, it turns out that while these two problems are not exactly the same, systems that are able to solve the second in a proper way, and I will discuss what I mean by proper in the second part of the talk, are also able to be very easily modified to address also the first use case. So the researchers focus mainly on the problem of speaker verification, that is, verifying whether a speech segment belongs to a claimed identity, so to a given person. Now, if we look at the standard way to perform automatic speaker verification, we can see that the standard chain closely mimics the standard chain that you would find in machine learning books that describe how we address the pattern recognition problems. So essentially we have an initial phase where we do some kind of feature extraction. Then we have some additional phase where we start from the features and we convert that to speaker models or something that resembles speaker models. We call this voice prints because essentially they mimic the fingerprint, but they are made from voice. And then the last stage involves classifying the utterance starting from the voice print. Now, we'll not spend a long time to talk about feature extraction because it's not really the focus of our research. The acoustic feature extraction is pretty much standard and it's pretty much the same in the last 20 years. And essentially it involves splitting the audio stream, so the audio signal in small chunks. These chunks are something like 10 milliseconds long. And then on each chunk we perform some spectral analysis to extract some coefficient that describe the spectral properties of the chunk. So essentially in the end we end up with small vectors that are between 10 to 60 dimensional, and each of these vectors represents something like 10 milliseconds of the acoustic signal. If we stack all those together, we will get the acoustic features that describe the whole signal. Now, this is the starting point, so we usually start from this kind of representation of the acoustic signal, and the first step is being able to create something that captures the characteristics of the speaker. So some representation that can be used to identify who is speaking. And possibly what we would like to have, since utterance can have different durations, is that these representations are of fixed size so that their size does not depend on the duration of the voice segment. Now, to do this, there are essentially two main approaches. The first one is a statistical approach, and I will spend some time talking about this because it's been one of the main focus of our research. It's called I-vectors, and I will describe what it is in a moment. The second one is something that has become more widespread in the last couple of years that mimics what is done in face recognition and extracting face embedding. So essentially we use a neural network to map an acoustic segment to a fixed dimensional vector. Now, the good thing is that these two models, the output of these two models is actually quite similar, so the techniques that we use to classify vectors can be translated almost all to the neural embeddings that have shown to be more performant than I-vectors, at least for some tasks, with some issues that I will detail when I get to talk about those. So in general, what works on I-vectors will also work on these embeddings with some small exception. Now, since I-vectors have been the state of the art for nearly a decade and still are the best solution for some tasks, and for some tasks, I mean tasks where we want to recognize the speaker and we know what utterance the speaker is going to speak. For example, think of people who say, okay, Google, to unlock the smartphone, the sentence is known because the sentence is okay, Google, so that's called a text-dependent task because we know the text. So for this field, it's still the best of the state of the art, and there's been the state of the art also for text-independent tasks for nearly a decade, so it's useful to spend a few words on what are I-vectors. Now, if you want to summarize in 4 words what is an I-vector is a low-dimensional, map-adapted GMM supervector. What does this mean? It means that it's a statistical model that tells us how the acoustic feature of a given utterance or of a given speaker change with respect to the acoustic features of a global population. That is, we can start thinking that we have access to the features of, to acoustic features of lots and lots of speakers. These acoustic features, we call it frames. These frames will have some distribution. We can estimate the distribution. If we estimate the distribution of using lots and lots of speakers, what we get is a model that describes globally the distribution of the acoustic space, of the acoustic features. This is usually done by means of a Gaussian mixture model. We call it universal background model, universal and background because it describes the universal population theory, and background because it describes it's trained not on the speaker we want to recognize, but on a set of unknown background speakers that are not necessarily the one we want to track. Now, once we have this model, we can focus on describing how a single user, what are the characteristics of a single user. So let's say we have the UPM and we have the audio frame of the user that we want to track. So we want to identify these guys and we have some speech segment. What we can do is we can analyze how the distributions, the different components of our model would move if we were to fit the acoustic frame coming from this person. Now, since we have lots and lots of Gaussians and we usually have few speech frames, we do not allow this kind of adaptation to be performed freely, but we assume that the way these components of our GMM would move are correlated. In which way they are correlated? Essentially, we say that if we stack all the means of the supervector of the GMM, the displacement that we would observe for a given speaker happens in a small subspace. So, in a subspace of the GMM supervector means described by a low-rank matrix. Now, essentially, what do we do is we say these shifts are correlated. We have a vector W that explains how the shift happens, and for each utterance we can essentially select the shift that best explains the features that we have observed for the given utterance. In this way, essentially we get a small vector that describes how we should move the components of our GMM to better fit the frames of a given speaker. Since this reflects how the frames move when going from the universal background model to our speaker, this representation is actually a representation that contains useful information to discriminate between different speakers. Next, once we have this kind of representations, we can finally try to decide whether the claimed identity is our target speaker, and this involves essentially deploying classification models that are able to answer to our speaker verification question. Now, the first way, the standard way before 2010 to address this kind of problems is what I call voice print versus audio approach. The voice versus audio approach is what? It's a framework where essentially we solve the speaker verification problem in this way. We start from the speaker we want to identify, we extract acoustic features, and we start by vectors or voice print, and from those voice prints we create a speaker model for the target speaker. The target speaker is also called enrollment speaker, so we call it E here. So we have a model for our target speaker, then we get a test segment, so somebody else is speaking, maybe the same user, but it's a different voice segment, and we want to verify whether this segment belongs to that speaker. We, depending on the model, we score somehow, we compare this test audio with respect to that speaker model, and we get an output that tells us how likely it is that the test audio comes from the speaker model that we have built. Now, in terms of, well, there are essentially two main approaches to solve this problem. Generative approach. Generative means that we're using statistical models that describe how the feature behaves, for example, the UPM that I've shown before. In this first approach, generative approach, a possible solution would be we extract the vector from the user. From that, we build the GMM that describes the features of this user. Then the test utterance comes, and we compute the likelihood of these frames over the speaker-dependent GMM, over the universal background model. We take the ratio of the two, and that tells us how likely it is that these frames come from this speaker rather than from any other possible speaker. Now, this model has also, can be also, well, our voice versus audio approach is also a discriminative variant in which essentially we train an hyperplane, SVM hyperplane, to do what? Well, for each speaker that we want to recognize, we train a single model, so we have one model per speaker that tries to separate for example, vectors of that speaker from a set of background vectors. In this way, when we have a test vector, we just compare whether this test vector is on this side of the hyperplane or on the other to decide whether it's from the same speaker or not. Now, this approach works better than the generative one. It has several drawbacks. It requires, first of all, to train one model for each speaker, but that's intrinsic of this kind of approach. We need to train a model for each speaker and then use the model to test a score, to verify a test utterance. The second problem is that usually for the target speaker we have very few utterances. We might have even just a single utterance to identify our target, so in this case we would build an hyperplane where one class is just a single point. And the results, as you can imagine, are not very robust. Now, the big change, the big improvements that came to the field came essentially from a shift in the way we address the problem. So in the audio versus voice print approach, we create a model of the speaker that we want to identify, and then we test our audio frames with respect to that model. Now, the way we started addressing the problem after 2010 is something that does not, well, first of all, okay, one more thing. In the voices versus audio approach, there is also an asymmetry between the enrollment audio and the test audio. Because this audio is being used to build a model where this audio is tested against the model. But saying that one utterance is enrollment and the other is test is just something that is not intrinsic of the speech segment that we are analyzing. We could easily decide that we want to shift the naming of the two utterances, we want to build a model for this audio, then test this audio over the model for this speaker. And we would end up with something that will still tell us whether this audio is from this speaker, but in general these classifiers will not give the same answer. Now the shift came once we realized that we can actually do things slightly different. We can express the same problem, but in a slightly different way. Rather than saying one is a model and the other is a test segment, we do the following. We extract a voice print for the target speaker, and this will be a feature that we will use. Then, for the test speaker, we extract also a voice print that is a similar representation, and then, rather than building a model using this voice print to test this one, we directly build models that are able to compare the two voice prints. That is, we translate the problem into a comparison of voice prints. So we work in the space of voice print, and what we do is we do not compute anymore the probability of the test audio given the enrollment model, but what we do is we compute the probability that test and enrollment voice prints come from the same speaker, and the probability that they come from different speakers. Now, this led to essentially, again, two different flavors. The first is the generative approach that is known as probabilistic linear discriminant analysis, that is a statistical model, and I will come back in a moment to this approach. And the other was the discriminative counterpart. So what we did here was understand whether we can cast this approach into a discriminative framework. Now, this approach lends itself to naturally to a binary classification problem. Can be associated easily to a binary classification problem. Why? Because essentially what do we do here? We have an input space that consists of two I vectors, two voice prints, and what we want to do is to answer to the questions, are these pairs of voice prints from the same speaker or not? So, the output is a binary classification rule, yes or no, same speaker or different speaker, and the input space is, in this case, the pairs of possible voice prints. What does it mean? It means that when we start from possible utterance, these are I vectors, so each one of these vectors represents an utterance. The input space becomes input space where we stack pairs of these utterances, pairs of these vectors. We have the class of pairs that come from the same speaker, and class of pairs where the two vectors come from different speakers. And what we want to do is we want to classify these two different. We want to build a model that is able to recognize whether a point belongs to one or the other of these two classes. Now, what do we gain? We gain that, first of all, we have a single model, so we don't have anymore a model for each target person that we want to identify, but we have a single model that is trained on background speakers only, so we don't even need to know in advance the people we want to track. because when we want to identify somebody, we just need to extract his voice print and compare his voice print using this model with the test voice print. The problems come mainly from training. In test, this model is very fast because it essentially requires computing a quadratic form in these I vectors. These I vectors are usually 4 to 600 dimensional vectors, so this is pretty fast. The problems come from training. Why they come from training? Because this is a discriminative model, it requires lots of training data, and the problems come from the fact that we are actually training over pairs of utterance. What does it mean? It means that if we imagine that these are one-dimensional I vectors belonging to speaker 1, speaker 2, and speaker 3, if we form up all pairs, first of all, the number of pairs grows quadratically with the number of utterances. So if I have 9 utterances, I have 81 possible pairs. Second, if you look at this plot, you can see that same speakers lie in this region of the space and they are surrounded by different speaker trials. This means that we can't separate these two regions with a linear classifier. We need at least a quadratic separation surfaces. Which means that training this model is hard because we need to solve a problem where we have pairs of utterance. So imagine that just 100,000 utterance, all the pairs are 10 billions. These pairs, each of them is the taking of 2 I vectors, so it's something like 1,000 dimensional, and we need to use quadratic separation surfaces to address this problem. Now, this requires some careful design of the optimization. Now, we ruled out dual solvers because they would require gram matrices that would be 10 billions by 10 billions, so that's definitely out of our capabilities. We focus on primal solvers. We avoided a naive approach because they would be too expensive. What we did was we were able to exploit the correlations between the scores. What do I mean? I mean that if I have to classify all pairs of vectors coming from a set of utterances, since the set of utterance is actually n-sized, it means that the scores are correlated. We can exploit these correlations to reduce the number of computations that we need to score all these possible pairs. Second, we can prove that the number of supervectors, that is, the number of vectors that really are relevant for this classification, grows, in this case, linearly with the number of utterances. And not only grows linearly with the number of utterances, we can easily find out which are those that are more likely to be, those points that are more likely to become supervector. In this way, we can essentially further reduce the amount of time that we need for each iteration by essentially throwing away most of the trials that are not relevant to train the model. Now, the benefit of the model is that it's the same accuracies as state-of-the-art generative approach that to which I will come back in a while, and it's effective not just with I vectors but also with different front ends. Here I have some results that show that regardless of the data sets or the front end that is used, so the kind of voice print that we use, we usually have between 10 to almost 20% improvement in detection cost. Now, let me check the time. Okay. Now, since I talk about I vectors, and I vectors are the core of the technology in speaker recognition, it might be interesting to spend a couple of words to describe what we did in the field of extracting I vectors. I said I vectors are low-dimensional representations of a GMM supervector. They are obtained as the maximum a posteriori point estimate of a hidden value of a latest random variable. The problem is that computing these terms is usually quite expensive. In which sense? In the sense that it requires either loss of memory or loss of time. By loss of memory, I mean that it can, to achieve something that is fast enough to be used, for example, on a smartphone, we would require between 3 to 6 gigabytes of RAM. And or otherwise, if you want something that can easily fit in a low-end device, then it would become very, very slow. Alternatively, there have been some proposals that address the memory problem, but with significant accuracy degradation. Now, since neither of these solutions is really good for low-end devices, we spent some time understanding how we can efficiently extract this kind of representations. And this work was mainly driven by our collaboration with Nuance. And what we did was essentially come with two models. The first model works mainly on the statistical part of the problem. That is, it involves approximating the distribution, the posterior distribution that describes an vector, with a technique that allows us to compute the same map point estimate. Essentially, it becomes equivalent to an iterative scheme where we compute different parts of the vectors by keeping fixed all the others, and then we iterate this process. And this resulted in something that is as fast as the standard technique and preserves accuracy and does not require loss of memory. Does not require loss of memory still means that we are around 1 to 2 gigabytes of memory, which was not enough for very low-end devices. So we also proposed a second approach that introduces also a factorization of those matrices that describes the subspace where a vectors lie, and this factorization was chosen to both strongly compress the information and allow for very fast extraction of the vectors. Now, I'm not getting into details, I just want to show the results that essentially we are able to maintain the same accuracy as the standard approach while achieving 1 order of magnitude reduction in time and 2 order of magnitude reductions in the memory consumption of the system. Okay, now after this short parenthesis, we can go back to our main task, that is voice-print classification. And I would like to discuss about a model that we were developing in parallel to the pairwise SVM. So we said the pairwise SVM is effective, but to get the pairwise SVM to be effective took some time because, as I said, the model requires more data than generative approaches because it's discriminative. So it took some time to be able to train with lots of data. In the meantime, we also spent some time working on the other state-of-the-art approach, PLDA, and in particular finding ways to improve PLDA-based classification in presence of short utterances. Now, what do I mean by this? It means that in presence of short utterances, we have, well, let's make first this slide. Now, PLDA is what? PLDA is a statistical model that describes an array vector in terms of latent variable. We have a latent variable that relates to the speaker. This latent variable has the same value for all the utterances of the same speaker, and then there is an additional noise term that is responsible for the discrepancy between the observed vector and the latent variable. So, essentially what it says is that to obtain an observed vector, we first start from a speaker latent variable, and then the vectors are samples that lie around this speaker variable. Now this model works well, but as PSVM, it suffers when we deal with short utterances. It's really not a limitation of PLDA, it's more a limitation of the front end that produces PA vectors. What I mean that if we have short utterances, then our estimate that tells us how the characteristics of the speaker differ from the background population, this estimate becomes less reliable because we have less audio, so estimating how the frames move with respect to the global population becomes more difficult. That means that when we deal with short utterances, our classifiers will behave worse. Now, something that is peculiar of iVectors, however, is that the iVector model is able itself to tell us how much reliable is the estimate of our vector. That means, being a statistical model, we can quantify the uncertainty in the estimation of our voice print. Now, the estimation of our voice print can be used to do what? To incorporate this uncertainty model in the classifier. If we are able to take into account the uncertainty, the vector extraction process in the classifier, then we can improve the classification accuracy. Now, this is difficult in the PSVM framework, and we have some ways to do it, but it's still under work, it's still a work in progress. It's much more easy in the PDA framework because the PDA framework is already a statistical model, so it is fairly natural to incorporate the effects of iVector uncertainty inside the model itself. So essentially what I proposed was a PDA model that integrates in a Bayesian way over the iVector uncertainty, and this results in models that are much more accurate when we deal with short utterances. Of course, if the utterances are long, the uncertainty is low, so the gains are negligible, but when the utterances are short, then the gains can become relevant. Again, we are talking about 10 to 15% improvement with respect to models that do not take into account the iVector uncertainty. Now, as I said, this model is peculiar to the iVector PLDA world because it cannot be extended to PSVM and it cannot be extended to neural embeddings. I will come back to this when we talk about score models and show that we can actually do something about this problem also with those two, with PSVM and neural embeddings. Now, right now we have pervasive SVM, as I said, is better than PLDA, provided that we have enough data. We have PLDA improvements with short utterances. The next thing we worked on was improving the PLDA model itself, also for long utterances. Why do we want to focus on PLDA since it works worse than PSVM? A possible reason is that PLDA and PSVM provide complementary information. So it's not here, no, okay, I will show it later. Provide complementary information so that if we can get a PLDA model that has similar performance as the PSVM one, then we are going to get additional benefit, overall benefits in terms of classification accuracy by fusing the outputs of the two models. Now, what is the main problem with PLDA? The main problem with PLDA is that it is based on the assumptions that our iVectors follow Gaussian distribution. Now, the Gaussian distribution is useful because it provides us closed-form posteriors, closed-form inference, so it's very easy to train and to score the model. The problem is that in reality, our distributions are not really that Gaussian. And when the distributions are not really what the model assumes, the generative models tend to provide suboptimal decisions. So here the goal was to go beyond the Gaussian assumptions of the PLDA, but we have also another problem. We need to be able to score in reasonable time. So we cannot afford to have models that are too complex, because otherwise we will not be able to use them in practical scenarios. Now, my idea was to combine essentially PLDA with what we call density transformation. What do we mean by density transformation? Essentially, we mean a way to transform data in a we mean the following thing. let's say we start from a population that has been sampled from a Gaussian distribution. Now, if we apply a function to that population, we end up with a different population that has a different distribution. If we go with the inverse function on the way back, we recover samples that are again samples of a Gaussian distributed random variable. Now, this going back and forward, we can do it if f is an invertible function, and the interesting thing is, if f is invertible, then we can describe the distribution of these populations in terms of the distribution of a Gaussian random variable and the Jacobian of the transformation itself. Now, why is this good? This is useful because we can then imagine that it's true that our array vectors are not Gaussian distributed, but we can still imagine that our array vectors are generated in the same way. We start from PLDA model. A PLDA model is a generative model, so it explains how we create our array vectors. And so we say that to obtain an observed array vector, it's sampled from the same PLDA model we have seen before, that would lead to Gaussian distributed samples, but then the samples are transformed by a nonlinear invertible function. This nonlinear invertible function will actually be a parametric function that we need to estimate. What we are saying here is that, essentially, we are able to model part of the non-Gaussianity in the vector space using a suitable nonlinear function. Now, why do we put the transformation here rather than using a single transformation for each of these terms? The reason is that using this particular model, this is not the most generic form that I can use to model non-Gaussianity, but it's useful because it allows to preserve some properties of the PLDA model that are essential to obtain a fast scoring. It is, using this particular model, we preserve transform Gaussian posteriors for the hidden variables, which means that essentially we can perform inference in a time that is very, very close to that of the standard PLDA model. Now, this model works pretty well, especially in text-dependent scenarios, and it can reach the same accuracy as the pervasive SVM, in this case, be even better. Again, this happens more in text-dependent scenarios. And so, with not only with respect to PLDA, but as I was suggesting before, the fact that now we have two similar behaving models that have a very different nature, so they base their classification on very different ideas, allows us to fuse the scores of the two models to further gain in terms of accuracy. So when we combine the nonlinear PLDA, the pervasive SVM, we get another 10% improvement with respect to what we had before. Okay, so now this concludes the first part. The second one will be shorter, so I'm almost done through this presentation. The second part of this talk, I would like to describe what we are essentially working on at the moment. That has something to do with how we interpret the output of a classifier. Now, as I said before, a classifier should tell us whether two utterances are from the same speaker or not. That's not really true, but we do not want our classifier to give us a yes or no decision, but we rather want that our classifier tells us how likely he believes that the utterances are from the same speaker. Why is this? That's because essentially deciding whether I should say yes or no, I should accept or no the claimed identity is something that depends on who is going to use my speaker recognition application. What does it mean? It means that imagine that I want an application that recognizes the user to unlock the smartphone that the user has does not contain, it might not be the reality, but let's say it does not contain sensitive information. The user just wants something that is fast and that can unlock easily the phone. What he wants is something that will not require him to say the passphrase several times, but and he can accept in the meantime that it's not as secure as he would require if the smartphone was holding sensible information. That is, depending on the application, we might want to trade off security for accessibility. So we want either a recognizer that allows me, that makes more error where it says yes, it's the claimed identity, while it was not true. This when we want more accessibility, but at the same time, some other application might want more security, so they might prefer to say, when they are in doubt, no, because saying yes when I should have said no would cost me much more. For this reason, our system should just not say yes or no, but should give us a number that tells us how sure it is that it should be yes or no. Ideally, these scores should be log-likely relations, because if they are log-likely relations, then we can perform optimal decisions once we know the application-dependent cost for the errors and priors for the same different speaker class. Now, unfortunately, in general, this is not something that we have. That is, our classifiers do not output log-likely ratios for lots of reasons. One reason might be that my model is not a probabilistic classifier, so I don't even know what likelies are. But even when we're working generative classifier, we can have incorrect model assumptions, or there can be mismatch between the test and trained population, which result in score that lose the log-likely ratio interpretation. So the goal here, the first goal is to recover the LLR interpretation of our scores. Now, one more thing I would like to say. This usually requires, since this train test mismatch is one of the main causes of miscalibration, this usually requires that we are able to evaluate our scores on a small set that mimics our test conditions, so that we can compensate the miscalibration due to this kind of mismatches. Now, the main approaches to perform this kind of work are isotonic regression and logistic regression. The second one being the state-of-the-art in speaker recognition. These two approaches work very well, especially the second one, for our field, but they require that the test set, that the training set that we use to train this kind of models is labeled. So they require a label set that closely mimics the test use case. Now, this might not always be available, so there is some interesting generative approaches that can provide us calibration models that can be trained in an unsupervised way. Now, these models essentially start from some properties that log-likely regressions have. When trained in a discriminative way, when trained in a supervised way that achieves similar results to the discriminative models, on the other hand, they can be easily extended to unsupervised training. So they can provide us calibration models even if we have just unlabeled data available. The main drawback of these models, so the main problem that we face with this model, is that we need to be very careful in modeling the distributions of our scores. Why is that? It is because the calibration datasets are in general very unbalanced datasets. Imagine that I want to recalibrate my system, I collect some data that behaves like my test data, so it contains repetition of several speakers. Again, if this is unlabeled, I can just take all possible pairs, and the number of non-target scores will be much higher than the number of target scores. So essentially, if I plot the histogram of my scores, I would end up that my scores have this kind of shapes. These are the non-target scores that I observe, and the target scores that are those that I want to locate are just a very tiny fraction that is usually hidden below the tail of non-target distribution. So the goal here is to identify where these samples are, in this kind of scenarios where these are just a fraction that can be 1 over 100 or 1 over 1000 with respect to the other class. Now, the reason why this is difficult is because they are few, they are below the tail of the target distribution. So, to be able to do this, we need to have accurate models that allow us to describe how the log likelihood ratios should behave, so that we can get good estimates of the tail behavior of our distributions. Now we have some work in progress where we are showing that, for example, for PLDA models, we need to resort at least to the class of generalized hyperbolic distributions, because the log likelihood ratios of PLDA model are skewed, are non-symmetric, and cannot therefore be, for example, modeled by Gaussian distributions. And in particular, we have obtained already good results using some subclasses of these family of distributions. Here you can see an example where we effectively estimate the density of target and non-target. This was estimated from actually this kind of histogram. So we were able to locate this part inside of samples in a completely unsupervised way. Now, to give you an example of why this method works well, it works well because it can, first of all, it can work well with all the front ends that I've been presenting today and all the classifiers that I've been presenting. Then it can locate where are the target scores with proportions that go as low as 1 over 1000. So we can locate those points when the target to non-target ratio is 1 to 1000, and we achieve the same results as the supervised approach. So here, this is our technique, my technique unsupervised, and this is the supervised logistic regression approach, and you can see that they pretty much have the same performance. Now, what's interesting in this work is that we can go beyond the application of score calibration. So score calibration is useful application, but the model opens up further possibilities. Further possibilities that rely essentially on the fact that we know now how to describe what is the expected behavior of the log likelihood ratio of our model, and so we can also model how different sources of nuisance would affect the distributions of our likelihood ratios. And once we can model how the mismatch of the nuisance components would affect the log likelihood ratios, and by nuisance components we can, for example, think about different durations, then we can employ techniques that allows us to compensate these effects on the likelihood ratio level. That is, we can, for example, incorporate duration effects in methods that are not directly able to provide us estimate or use estimate of voice bit uncertainty by directly modeling effects of durations on the score and compensating these effects at the score level. Here we have some preliminary results that have not been published yet, but we show that, for example, using the model that I just showed, we are essentially able to achieve the same performance as the PLDA plus electron uncertainty model that I was presenting before. Okay, since it's late, I would skip the next 2 slides and finally get to where we can go from further. So, of course, some future work will be still working on score calibration and going back to the classifier backends. So there are some things that we would like to try, that I would like to try both on the classification level to extend to PSVM to work with a nonlinear version of the PSVM, and also some works on the front end that involves improving the DNN-based embedding extractors. But apart from that, other possible applications arise from similar fields, such as, for example, face identification. Face identification is something that is has become very similar to speaker recognition. Why? Because once we start working with DNN embeddings in speaker recognition and DNN embeddings in face recognition, essentially the two problems become pretty much the same. We have a small representation of our input space, and we need to classify whether these representations belong to the same individual or not. So for example, we have some preliminary results that show that NLP and SVM models are effective also for face recognition. This is a face recognition task that, well, we extract DNN embeddings and then we apply on top of those the techniques that I have presented today. And something that would be interesting to go to study is also the possibility of doing multimodal and cross-modal identification. Now, multimodal is something that has already been around. It involves combining both voice and speech. But we can think of multimodal combinations both at score level, classifier, front-end level. Something that I would also like to investigate are cross-modal classification, where essentially we want to compare the voice audio, a voice segment, with a picture of a face. And for that, there are some ideas to both train joint face-voice embedding. There are some preliminary results that show that this is somehow possible. And then there are some possibilities that I have in mind to work at the classifier level, both with an extension of PLDA and SVM that are able to compare embeddings that come from different front ends, so embeddings that live in different spaces, but nevertheless we can compare that. That is something that is probably be part of my future work. Now this concludes my talk, so if you have any questions.
Maybe a very simple one. When you started, you said, okay, the representation of the data we have for processing is fairly standard, and we don't elaborate on this because it's not trivial but standardized. So I'm wondering, since also how you present the data is very important, have you ever thought of questioning the starting data representation to see if you can gain something better by changing the way you model the starting data? Is there any room for improvement in this part?
There are some possibilities, but they are beyond our capabilities, in the sense that there has been lots of research. There have been many people who tried to do this in the past, and in the end, apart from a couple of models, we end up that features that were used 20 years ago are still those that are the best. And these people that were doing it are signal processors, people that know much more about this task than I do. So I guess that if they didn't manage to do a lot up to now, there might not be that large possibility. I mean, even now when we are using DNN-based embeddings, there are people who try to start from the signal, but in the end, starting from the signal or from the features that we use, there is not big difference. So there's not much. It looks like the features that we use are already quite good for the problem. So maybe there might be some improvements, but most of the papers that we see, they still use some sort of feature extraction similar to the one that we do here. Then there are many flavors of this, so some work slightly better in some tasks, some slightly better in some other, but more or less the techniques are the same with some small nuances. Other questions?
I was curious about the numbers, for instance, the OK Google task. How many times it recognizes the speaker versus how many not? With the, 1 second.
Okay, I don't know with the OK Google, but because I don't have the OK Google numbers, but I can say it's good is something similar for nuanced technology, that's similar, I think slightly longer. But thing is, if the address is fixed, then it's easier to recognize the speaker because we remove lots of variability that is due to the phonetic content. So the OK Google task, even if it's very short, it's easier than a text-independent task with long utterances. So the accuracy for a similar task that we have are around 2-3% equal error rate. So if we assume that the error rates are the same, we're talking about 2-3% errors. Then if you want more security, then we will have different percentage of errors of false alarms and false acceptance, but well, false acceptance and false rejection, but it depends on the application, so we was saying before. But if we consider a point where the two kind of errors are the same, then it's 2-3%.
And in case you have free speech?
For free speech, it really depends, because we have data sets that are fairly clean, long, I mean 30 seconds, where we can easily go up to 1%. Then there are data sets where the speech is taken in the wild, so with noise, background noise, and maybe also non-native speakers, and then you can easily get 10%. So it really depends on the application again that you use the recognizer for. For example, the dataset that we were using in 2010, there are these evaluations that are held by NIST. So they have evaluations every 1 or 2 years where many teams participate. And when we compare results, but the good thing is that we have common benchmark that is available afterwards. So for example, nowadays, the one from 2010, there was 3% when we started, is already below 1%. But the last one, there was like 2019, I think we were around 6, 7, 8% again equal. It's a different data set. It's with higher noise levels. There is some mismatch between the training data and the test data. And in this case, the error rate can go up much more. So it really depends. Other questions?
How many utterances do you need to be able to detect a speaker? So what is the size of the training set?
Okay, that's a good question. Now we have, again, depends on the classifier, depends on the front end. Generative classifiers work well with fewer utterances. So for example, at the beginning, PLDA was the state of the art for a few years because at the time we had datasets that were almost 20,000 utterances, and for example, PSVA with 20,000 is not really better than PLDA. Then now we have datasets with 100 to 200,000 utterances, and there now we get the discriminative models usually work better. Again, the same for vectors. I can train an vector circle that is good with 10,000 utterances. I cannot do that for neural embeddings. For neural embeddings, we need hundreds of thousands of utterances with data augmentation. That's something that would not be beneficial for the vector. They would separate much earlier. But if I need to, if I have, for example, in a completely different field where I have some specific data, where I do not have lots of data, the technique will still be better. For example, I said vectors are still used in text-dependent, because for text-dependent we have much less material than we have for text-independent. For text-independent we can just download from YouTube, do some kind of automatic sort, automatic labeling. That's what they actually do for the evaluations nowadays, and give us maybe 100,000 utterances. For text-dependent, I need to go to my clients, collect the utterances, so I have a lot less amount of data if I'm not Google. If I'm Google, then I got the recording, so I do data a lot. And in that case, iVectors are still providing better results than neural embeddings, because the neural embeddings either I train from the text-independent task, so they work worse because it's completely different data, or I don't have enough data to train them for the text-dependent task. Then there are also some other motivation, for example, in text-dependent, since I know that, especially the common pass to the OK Google scenario, where the utterance is always the same, I can use more refined model, for example, hidden Markov model in place of Gaussian mixture models that also take into account how the utterance should evolve. This is more difficult in the neural network part because I cannot force the evolution that I want to and that I know that should be there. So in the end, this allows us to get slightly better results for the text dependent again with the statistical approaches like vectors. Others? Questions? Thank you.
Vi ricordo di prossimo terzo mercoledì